Hey guys, so this is a quick video to help you study further for the Unit 1 quiz. The question says, for the following quadratic, identify all of the following: A, vertex and either the maximum or minimum values, B, intervals of increasing / decreasing, C, domain and range, D, all x and y-intercepts, E, intervals where the graph is positive and negative, meaning f of x is positive or f of x is negative, F, axis of symmetry, and G, end behavior. So to get started with part A, what is the vertex for this graph? We just say that the vertex, and then we locate the vertex. The vertex is the highest or the lowest point on the graph. In this case, it's this point right here, which is 1 unit to the left and 8 units up. So basically, you're doing this. From the vertex, you're going down. You have a -1 on the x-axis and 8 on the y-axis. So this is -1, 8. Now the second, so this is vertex. The second part of this was, is it a maximum or is there a maximum or minimum? It doesn't have to be the vertex, by the way, but in a quadratic, usually the vertex is not always the vertex is the maximum or minimum, basically. Here, the vertex is the max. So you'd say maximum of, remember, the maximum is the y value. We're talking about height. So it's a maximum of 8. This is part A. Part B, intervals of increasing and decreasing. Remember, when the graph is increasing, that means it's going upward. So for instance, here, the graph is increasing here. Actually, it's increasing from down and on, from here and on. So let me clear that. Increasing is from here and all the way up. And this is increasing. Versus decreasing, which is the other side of this, which is from here and down. This is decreasing. So I want to talk about the intervals, meaning the x intervals or the x value. So think about it, this is going upward, right? It's increasing here. So what are the x values that kind of cover this area? If you think about it, the x values at the highest point here, where it's increasing all the way up to here, it's this x value, which is -1. And anything to the left of it. So think about it, if you're coming from negative infinity, right? The graph, remember, this graph is going downward. So as x goes from negative infinity, which is basically all these lower values here of the y, all the way down here, right? If you continue this graph, you're gonna map to these values of x. So basically, this interval, this here is increasing from negative infinity all the way up to -1. That means if the x values go from negative infinity to -1, your graph is going upward, which is basically saying this portion here of the graph or of the interval. Okay, so I would say for part B, I would say increasing, or f of x is increasing, just let's be f of x is increasing. You can say just increasing, that's fine. F of x is increasing on which interval? On negative infinity and comma all the way to -1. Now we kind of agreed that for intervals, just keep them open or parentheses basically. Whereas it's decreasing, where is f of x decreasing? F of x is decreasing. F of x is going downward basically. Remember, increasing means going up and decreasing means going down. It's going down this way here. So what are the x values for which this is going down? Again, it starts here. It starts at -1 and anywhere to the right, going towards positive infinity. So if you're anywhere for the x values from -1 and all the way to the right, your graph is going downward. How do you say that? From -1 to the right, you would say on -1 and all the way to the right, which is infinity. Again, in parentheses. So this is part B. Part C, so we talked about increasing, decreasing. Part C was domain and range. Domain is the acceptable values of x, domain. So what is the domain? What is the range? For a quadratic that goes all the way to the left and all the way to the right, the domain is negative infinity to infinity. Remember, this is the notation that you're expected to write on the quiz. You don't write all real numbers. Even though all real numbers is correct, but you're expected to write an interval notation. This is the correct notation. Okay, no other notations will be acceptable for this. It will be considered wrong. Meaning interval, you just use from and to like this. Range, how far up or down does your graph go? The graph goes all the way down. But if you go all the way up here, it doesn't go beyond 8. So you reach 8 and above 8, there's no graph. So how do you say that? Again, for the range, you start from all the way down, which is negative infinity in parentheses, comma, all the way up to 8. The y value goes up to 8. And because 8 is included, we need to put a bracket. Just be careful with that. And that's for part C domain. D. So C is done. D, all x and y intercept. Where does the graph meet or cross the x-axis? What are the x-intercepts, if any, and what are the y-intercepts? Where the graph meets or crosses the y-axis. So the graph crosses the, let's use a different color. The graph crosses the x-axis here, this point and this point. These are your intercepts, your x-intercepts. So we call them -3, 0. And the other one is 1, 0. Remember, in ordered pairs as well. Oops, sorry. That's supposed to be next to the x-intercept right here, 1, 0. Those are x-intercepts. Now, where does the graph meet or cross the y-axis? And I'm going to use a different color for that. Let's use this color. This is the y-intercept right here in blue. This is where the graph crosses the y-axis. And this point is 0, 6. Okay, again, in ordered pairs. Part E. Part E says, what are the intervals where the graph is positive? So now we're talking, where is the graph above? Positive means, let me use a different color. Positive is this. This is positive above the x-axis. This is where f of x is positive. Okay, and negative is below. So this is where f of x is negative. So positive, you would agree that the f of x is, this is f of x positive, not here actually, starting from right after it. So from right after this point and all the way back to this point without getting to these 2 points. Because if you're on the x-axis, the f of x is 0. It's not positive. We want it to be strictly positive. So I want to say right after -3 and right before +1. This is the interval, the x values. So these values right here, what are the x values for which the graph is above the x-axis? You're going to say from -3, +1. You would say f of x is positive on or for -3, 1. Now, where is it negative? Negative is going to be the other side. So negative, you're going to be below this point. This is where you're negative. This is where f of x is negative, and this is where f of x is negative. Maybe let me get rid of some of these notations here so it's kind of cleaner. Okay, so f of x is negative below. So how do I say that? How do I say f of x is negative? Below. So this is where f of x is negative, where the lavender color is. This and this. How do I say that? So basically I'm saying from -3 or to the left of -3, because I don't want -3. At -3, f of x is 0. And to the right of 1. So how do I say to the left of -3? I would say f of x is negative on, let me just maybe more space on what? To the left of -3. So from -infinity, -3, but then also add to that union from 1 and to the right, union 1, infinity. So to the left of -3 and to the right of 1. And this is it for intervals where the graph is positive and negative. F, we have axes of symmetry. Now, the axes of symmetry not always exist, but in a quadratic, normally, if you see a line, a virtual line, remember the axis of symmetry is a virtual line. It's not an actual line. if you see a virtual line, or if you can create a virtual line that can cross or split this graph, let me erase everything here, split this graph into two equally means in size and shape, or mirror image, basically. If you see a line, a virtual line that can do that, which in this case, we can see that this line here, this virtual line, can cut this graph into two equal parts, then that would be your axis of symmetry, or A.O.S, axis of symmetry. Then the question becomes, what is the equation for this axis of symmetry? What's the equation? Because this is a vertical line, vertical lines, so let's put here F. I meant F when I put F of X. Let's put axis of symmetry, A.O.S, and then write the equation. The equation, it's a vertical line, so it's x equals what? It's x equals whatever the x value is here, which is -1. So this line, this virtual line, has an equation of x equals -1. So that's pretty much it. This is your axis of symmetry. Now, if you have a graph that goes like this, and you know that this is the vertex, there's no really axis of symmetry, because the left-hand side and the right-hand side are not a match, okay? Just be careful with that. Lastly, end behavior. And end behavior is basically what's happening towards the end of the domain. So what happens as x goes to infinity, meaning as x goes all the way to the right, and what happens as x goes to -infinity, means as x goes all the way to the left. What happens to the graph when we say what happens? So for part G, we say as x goes to all the way to the right, what happens to f of x? Where's my graph? If I go all the way to the right, notice that my graph keeps going downward. So my graph is going to be down. That means f of x will be negative. And as x goes all the way to the left, meaning as x goes to -infinity, where does my graph go? If I go all the way to the left, my graph also goes down. That means f of x also goes to towards -infinity. And this is pretty much it, okay? This is pretty much it for this question. So make sure you understand these characteristics, you practice them well, and you know them in depth. The second part of this warm-up is, let's go down here, quickly 4 more questions. Determine the domain and range. So for number 1, the domain, where is the domain and what is the range? The domain is the starting x value. So think about it, you're mapping onto the x-axis. If you're taking this endpoint and mapping it onto the x-axis, and this point and mapping onto the x-axis, you start from here and you end here. So the domain is from 0 to 1, 2, 3. So the domain is 0, included 0. So we're going to put a bracket, comma 3. Why included? Because these are closed circles. That means when you map them, whatever value you map them to is also included, okay? So this is the domain. The range, you're going the other way for the range. For the range, you're going on the y, you're mapping onto the y-axis, so you're going from here to here. So you're saying between here and here. And again, it's from 0 all the way up to 3 up, also included. Okay, so these are the domain and range for the first question. Question number 2, again, for question number 2 is an example of, remember, talked in class about this, when you see a line or a curve that goes like this, it's assumed that it goes on indefinitely, meaning that it's assumed that these are arrows. So this graph for the domain, because it goes all the way to the left and all the way to the right, the domain is really -infinity to infinity. The range, also, if you go all the way to the left, notice that the graph keeps going downward, and here it keeps going upward. So really, we don't have a limit of how far down we're going or how far up. So the range for that reason is, remember, the range is the y values, also -infinity to infinity. That's that question here. Number 3, we're going to assume that these are endpoints, okay? So we're going to assume this is an endpoint, and so is this. So for the domain for number 3, how far to the left we're going? We stop here, on the left, and we stop here to the right. So the outermost left point for the domain is -1, -2, -3. So -3, comma, and if you go to the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that farthest point to the right is 5. So this is the domain from -3 to 5. For the range, how far up and down we're going. The lowest point on the range is this. This is the lowest point, and it has a y value of 0. So it's going from 0, comma, the highest point is this, and that's actually 2. So, comma, 2 included. And last one, number 4. What's the domain and range? Again, we talked about this in class. If we see this on a curve, we're assuming these aren't going indefinitely. So for the domain, we're going, because you're going all the way down, at the same time, you're going basically all the way to the left and all the way to the right. So for this reason, the domain is all real numbers, but we don't write all real numbers. Remember, we write -infinity, infinity. And the range is all the way down. Remember, the y values are going all the way down. But if you're going up, they're stopped here. There's no y value above this point. So we would say the range is from -infinity all the way up to the value 1. On the, basically, this is the value 1. That's the range. This is pretty much it. It's straightforward. It's not too difficult. You just need some practice. Please make sure you revisit this, pace accordingly, go back, pause, double check, triple check, make sure you understand the concepts, and good luck on your quiz tomorrow.